Anne of Ingleside. Chapter 1. Anne Blythe pulls up to Avonlea, giving major nostalgic main character energy for a sad family funeral, crashing in her iconic old gable room where local gossip legend Mrs. Lynde immediately feeds her all the neighborhood tea, including updates on Davy's marriage and warning her about the toxic relative Aunt Mary Maria Blythe, who loves to hate on Anne. Anne then links up with her ride-or-die bestie Diana Wright, who's looking slightly matronly and stressing about her husband Fred and their weirdly imaginative kid Anne Cordelia. And they plot an unhinged girls' day out to touch grass and pretend they aren't weighed down by adult responsibilities. Chapter 2. Anne and Diana embark on a hyper-romanticized nature walk through all their nostalgic childhood lore spots like Lover's Lane and the Haunted Wood, acting completely delulu like they're still 15 while ignoring their actual adult age. They vibe in Hester Gray's secret garden, eating illicit chocolate cake, swap chaotic gossip about awkward family weddings and medical operations, and low-key dread going back to their mom duties and household chaos. Chapter 3. Anne takes the train back home to Ingleside, her heart melting over a cute, messy letter from her son Jem, and gets picked up by Gilbert looking fresh with W. Riz in a new gray suit. She gets an aggressively chaotic welcome home from all her kids, who hand her random bouquets and drop wild lore updates about medical close calls and pet disasters, while the legendary household manager Susan Baker low-key panics because she temporarily misplaced the sacred hearth dogs, Gog and Magog, after a visitor showed up. Chapter 4. A rebellious little Jem throws massive tantrums at the dinner table after being grounded and denied a trip down to the harbor mouth to watch a sketchy sailor named Captain Bill Taylor tattoo a snake, while the insufferable new house guest, Aunt Mary Maria Blythe, acts like an absolute Karen and whines about modern parenting and the lack of physical punishment. Meanwhile, the family navigates the awkward logistics of hosting Aunt Mary Maria, who inspects chimneys like a health inspector and complains endlessly, though Susan tries her absolute best to protect the kids from her bad vibes. Chapter 5. While Anne gets ready for a romantic evening drive with Gilbert to visit a dying local, poor Jem sits on the porch steps spiraling into an existential doom loop of teenage angst, inventing elaborate revenge fantasies against his parents, Susan, and the entire world, because he is forced to miss out on the local neighborhood lore and drama. Chapter 6. Total mass hysteria erupts at Ingleside when Susan realizes Jem has vanished after his meltdown, leading to an Avonlea-wide search party featuring dragged pawns, dramatic false alarms, and Aunt Mary Maria dropping the most unhinged psychological terror comments imaginable. The crisis is finally solved when they find a sleeping Jem cozy in the window seat with his teddy bear and the cat, completely diffusing the absolute circus and ending the night with sweet, wholesome apologies and a much-needed cup of tea. Chapter 7. Walter prepares to get banished to Lowbridge for 2 weeks with the chaotic Parker family, while back at home, Susan and Aunt Mary Maria trade passive-aggressive jabs after Walter accidentally leaves a dead fish in the bathtub. Chapter 8. Dad drops Walter off at the overwhelming Parker household, where a bunch of obnoxious kids, including the mean Andy and the sweet, curly-haired Alice, tease him relentlessly, before the older kids cruelly drop the bomb that his mother might be sick and dying. Chapter 9. Trapped alone in his room by moonlight and spiraling into a total panic over the rumor that his mom is dying, Walter stages an absolute hero's escape, sneaking out of the house in the dead of night to brave ghosts, shadows, and a terrifying 6-mile walk all the way back home to Ingleside. Chapter 10. Walter finally makes it back home to Ingleside at dawn, only to step on the family cat, waking up Susan, who wraps him in warmth, feeds him, and assures him his mom is completely fine, while Anne and Gilbert welcome a brand new baby sister named Bertha Marilla into the chaotic, loving fold. Chapter 11. Summer fades into a vibrant autumn filled with visits from old friends like Diana and little Elizabeth, while back at home, Susan and a newly arrived Rebecca Dew secretly vent and bond over their absolute hatred for the insufferable Aunt Mary Maria, who continues to drive everyone insane with her endless complaints and passive-aggressive antics. Chapter 12. Winter blankets Ingleside in snow and festive cheer, but the household tension finally peaks when Miss Cornelia visits and bluntly tells Anne to grow a backbone and kick Aunt Mary Maria out, leaving Susan and the family desperate for a way to escape their living nightmare. Chapter 13. Walter, Jem, and the rest of the excited Ingleside kids wake up to a magical, long-awaited white Christmas filled with glittering tree bubbles, hidden presents, and a hilarious Santa Claus who accidentally catches his beard on fire, though the festive cheer is briefly interrupted by Aunt Mary Maria's sour complaints about pagan Greek goddesses and old-fashioned clothing. Chapter 14. After a gloomy, erratic winter, spring finally hits Glen St. Mary in a dazzling explosion of daffodils, prompting Anne to plan a secret 55th birthday party for Aunt Mary Maria, complete with yellow roses and a massive coconut frosted cake, which completely backfires when the birthday girl throws an epic passive-aggressive temper tantrum over her exposed age and storms out, leading to her glorious and permanent departure from Ingleside the very next day. Chapter 15. With the toxic reign of Aunt Mary Maria finally over, a newly liberated household breathes a collective sigh of relief as summer returns in full bloom, bringing joyful visits from Miss Cornelia, blooming poppies, and a deeply peaceful atmosphere where the family can finally enjoy life, laughter, and each other without fear. Chapter 16. Anne Blythe fully enters her matchmaking villain era, cooking up a diabolical scheme to couple up Stella Chase, the sweet, soft-spoken, emotionally suppressed daughter of the sarcastic, evolution-loving skeptic Richard Chase, with Alden Churchill, the main character aesthetic farm boy and son of the hyper-strict, Bible-quoting Mary Churchill, because both of their parents are massive gatekeepers who aggressively block them from dating anyone. Anne low-key uses reverse psychology on Alden by pretending a rival dorky minister is gunning for Stella, then throws a chaotic, sweat-dripping summer party at Ingleside where the kids completely trash the house, smash priceless family antiques, and ruin the floors. But the sacrifice pays off because Alden and Stella instantly lock in and start low-key dating. Chapter 17. Anne keeps pulling strings like an absolute menace by visiting Mary Churchill for charity funds and casually baiting her about Stella potentially dating a minister, triggering Mary's massive ego because she refuses to let anyone think her son could get rejected, while Miss Cornelia simultaneously trolls Richard Chase into accidentally exposing his own protective soft spot for Stella's future, proving that all the anti-romance gatekeeping from the older generation is utterly failing and cementing Anne's undefeated, high-key, legendary matchmaker status across 4 wins. Chapter 18. Jem finally gets his main character energy when his friend Joe Reese gifts him an absolute icon of a dog named Jip, a chaotic yellow mutt with black ears who instantly becomes the family favorite, only for total tragedy to strike when poor Jip mysteriously gets sick and passes away, leaving Jem completely devastated. So to cope and honor his mom, little Jem locks in on a Sigma grind set to earn 50 cents for a pearl necklace for Anne's March birthday. Chapter 19. Jem goes full hustler mode to secure the bag, selling homemade Real Tops, his own milk teeth, his prized string of bird's eggs, and even his Saturday apple crunch pie to local menace Bertie Shakespeare Drew, stuffing every single coin into a shiny brass pig. Chaos ensues when the pig mysteriously vanishes right before a missionary auxiliary meeting hosted by the easily offended Mrs. Norman Taylor, forcing Jem to survive a brutal schoolyard side quest where he has to play clap in and clap out with the overly attached Sissy Flag, and pull off a psychological warfare bluff by calling Big Bully Fred Elliott a transubstantiationalist, only to discover via Mac Reese's mom that Mac broke the pig's tail and hid the pieces and coins inside one of Jem's Sunday boots. Chapter 20. Jem successfully secures the necklace and gifts it to Anne for her birthday, but his happiness gets absolutely obliterated when he's hanging out at Mr. Carter Flagg's store and overhears local girls Abby Russell and Leona Reese talking, making him realize the hard way that his 50-cent special is actually just a cheap imitation bead necklace rather than real luxury pearls. Completely heartbroken, a weeping Jem confesses everything to Anne, who drops an emotional masterclass by telling him that the love, effort, and pure dedication behind the gift make it infinitely more precious than $1 million heirloom, restoring his peace and locking in their wholesome mother-son bond. Chapter 21. The vibe shifts as April rolls in with chaotic weather swings, starting with false spring warmth before dropping an absolute jump scare of a snowstorm that leaves Ingleside frozen out. Once the weather finally clears, an absolute NPC named Mrs. Anthony Mitchell, an intensely dramatic widow flexing the ultimate mourning fit with heavy crepe veils and a double chin, pulls up to the house uninvited to bother Anne. She explains that her husband, Anthony Mitchell, has been dead for 2 months, and demands that Anne write a poetical obituary for him because local guy, Uncle Charlie Bates, has zero artistic vision and she refuses to let him handle it. Mrs. Mitchell rambles on with a massive lore dump about their 35-year marriage, how she used to be an elite baddie back in the day with endless beaux, while Anthony was a lean romantic king who wrote her poetry about moonlight, and how she completely regrets not cooking him a boiled hen before he passed away. Anne tries to lock her out of the conversation, but Mrs. Mitchell keeps oversharing about her bizarre collection of coffin plates she hoards on her mantelpiece, ultimately forcing a reluctant Anne to agree to write the obituary just to get her to leave. Chapter 22. Susan and Walter react to the chaos, with Susan gossiping about how Mrs. Mitchell used to be a local beauty back in the day even if she looks like a comic Valentine now, while Walter points out the spring wildlife taking over the yard. Anne sits down and reflects on the real Anthony Mitchell, a peaceful, nature-loving guy who found joy in his farm and trees rather than getting bogged down by his superficial wife, and writes a gorgeous atmospheric poem called The Old Man's Grave. A week later, Mrs. Mitchell comes back to pick up the text. While she thinks it sounds sprightly, she low-key complains that it didn't explicitly state Anthony went straight to heaven, or count the floral wreaths on his coffin. Anne politely dodges charging her money, accepting a bottle of sketchily potent dandelion wine instead. The absolute plot twist drops when the local newspaper, the Daily Enterprise, publishes the poem with an unauthorized, utterly unhinged fifth verse tacked on by Mrs. Mitchell's nephew, Johnny Plummer, praising Anthony as a wonderful husband in cheesy rhyming meter. Anne is left side-eyeing the whole situation while the community absorbs the chaotic editorial crossover. Chapter 23. The Ingleside kids go through an emotional roller coaster, dealing with a cursed streak of lost pets, starting with Jem's puppy vanishing into thin air, Tiger Tom the barn cat kicking the bucket, and Jem's pet rabbit Bun dying after a questionable dose of patent medicine. To cope with the grief, the kids wear black mourning ribbons around their arms, horrifying Susan, who also has to deal with Walter hiding live toads in the basement to save them from being single widower toads. Luckily, the narrative brightens up when the kids adopt an orphaned baby robin they name Cock Robin, who immediately becomes an absolute legend by moving into the house, stealing food right off the pets' plates, and flexing a gorgeous rusty red chest as he grows up. Meanwhile, the kids officially upgrade their outdoor hangout spot by renaming the local valley Rainbow Valley, turning it into an elite fantasy realm filled with white birch dryads, secret bridge guardians, and improvised roleplay adventures. Jem spends his evenings down at the harbor mouth hanging out with local salt-of-the-earth sea captains like Captain Malachi Russell, an epic old-school sailor covered in anchor tattoos who captains ships at age 17 and builds insane miniature ship models, while Jem tries to learn the ancient art of carving maritime history from scratch. Chapter 24. Jem continues his mission to fill the dog-shaped void in his heart after Jip's tragic death, spotting an ad for a dog owned by Roddy Crawford, a pale, freckled kid whose father just passed away and whose uncle is forcing him to give up his beloved pet. Jem offers his last dollar to buy him, but the transaction turns heartbreaking because the dog, Bruno, is an absolute one-man dog who refuses to bond with Jem, remaining completely depressed, homesick, and unresponsive, despite sleeping at the foot of Jem's bed and eating the best steaks. After a massive thunderstorm, Bruno runs away all the way back to the empty, abandoned Crawford farm 6 miles away, where Jem finds him huddled miserably on the cold doorstep. Realizing the dog is literally dying of a broken heart, Jem makes the ultimate sacrifice and gives Bruno back to Roddy when he comes to visit, earning a quiet wave of respect and a return dollar. Though a thoroughly devastated Jem is left completely wrecked and convinced he will never love another dog again. Chapter 25. The narrative shifts focus to the younger twins, Nan and Di, starting school, where Nan's hyperactive imagination leads her into making secret transactional bargains with God, promising to take horrible doses of castor oil, clean her bureau, or walk like a freak on all fours if God grants her trivial wishes like growing a tooth, finding a diamond-studded button, or getting a sunny picnic day. The real plot tsunami hits when both Gilbert and Anne fall deathly ill with severe pneumonia, plunging Ingleside into an absolute horror movie of anxiety and silent dread where the kids are barred from seeing their mother and nobody will tell them if she's going to survive. While Susan stressfully breaks dishes and worries for the worst, a terrified, weeping Nan realizes she has to step up her prayers and strikes a terrifying high-stakes bargain with God. If he saves her mother's life, she will brave her absolute worst phobia and walk all alone through the creepy Lower Glen graveyard in the pitch black of night. Chapter 26. Mother officially survives the medical crisis, leaving Susan and the kids overjoyed, but Nan realizes she can't ghost her terrifying pact with the Almighty and has to follow through on her promise to walk through the spooky graveyard. As the week drags on, she desperately tries to buy time through bad weather, like rain and fog, but by Saturday night, the weather clears up, the ominous blood-red moon rises, and a deeply stressed Nan has to sneak out of bed after Di finally falls asleep, determined to save her mother's health by facing the dead alone in the dark. After Nan confesses her failed graveyard pact to Anne, her mother gently dismantles her theology by explaining that God doesn't make bargains and only asks for love, promising to accompany her through the spooky graveyard once she fully recovers. Chapter October 27th arrives with crisp winds, apple picking, and cheerful laughter at Ingleside, though the family faces a bittersweet moment when they finally set their captive robin free to join the autumn migration south, followed by a cozy winter filled with fireside stories, local gossip shared by Miss Cornelia, and mischievous childhood antics. Chapter 28. Spring returns alongside Cock Robin with a brand new bride, and the household's focus shifts when an effortlessly cool and theatrical new girl named Jenny Penny arrives at the Glen School, instantly captivating the students with wild, grandiose stories of her wealthy and adventurous family. Chapter 29. Di completely clowned herself by ignoring Susan and her parents' warnings to sneak off for a sleepover at her new idol Jenny Penny's rundown, absolute trashfire farmhouse on the baseline, where she finally realized all of Jenny's main character stories were total cap. Dee met Jenny's unhinged family squad, including the chaotic, rowdy brothers Kurt and George Andrew, unbothered Aunt Lena, bachelor Uncle Parker, and Uncle Ben, who proudly preached his atheist anti-God agenda at the dinner table, culminating in a face-to-face jump scare with Gammy, the ancient, bedridden, and aggressive matriarch who interrogated poor Di about her petticoats and solid gold thimbles while throwing massive shade at Nan. The vibe went completely south during a chaotic dinner full of toxic screaming matches, shattering Di's worldview and curing her parasocial crush instantly. Things hit rock bottom later that night when George, Andrew, and Kurt terrorized her with a cursed, nightmarish mask, causing Di to trip, crack her head on a bed frame, and pass out cold, prompting the terrified Penny kids to literally smuggle her unconscious body a quarter-mile across fields and dump her like dead weight on the Ingleside porch. Di eventually woke up to get rescued by her parents, who returned early from their trip, fully learning her lesson about toxic friendships while Susan served tea. Chapter 30. Dovie Johnson, an 11-year-old slick talker from Charlottetown staying with her Aunt Ella, starts flexing hard on 8-year-old Nan Blythe down by the wharf, acting all mysterious and dropping major psychological warfare about possessing a dark, earth-shattering secret concerning Nan's true identity. Dovie completely stonewalls Nan's frantic begging, gatekeeping the lore until she successfully gaslights and manipulates innocent, sheltered Nan into trading her brand new red parasol, a recent gift from Anne brought straight from town, as absolute payment for the hot tea, establishing a toxic friendship dynamic while Nan's family remains completely oblivious to Dovie's shady gooseberry green eyes and manipulative games. Chapter 31. Nan spirals into a massive, guilt-ridden existential crisis after Dovie drops the absolute psychological jump scare that Nan is actually a switched-at-birth peasant child, specifically Cassie Thomas, the rough-around-the-edges daughter of six-toed Jimmy down at the harbor mouth, leaving poor Nan completely convinced her entire life at Ingleside is a massive, fraudulent glitch, and that her real identity belongs in squalor. Consumed by an intense, moralistic desire to be fair and do the right thing, a utterly miserable Nan starves herself, refuses to eat Susan's food, and eventually braves a terrifying thunderstorm to trek all the way down to the slummy harbor mouth Fisher Shack to confess the swap to six-toed Jimmy's messy, chaotic second wife, only to discover she's been completely trolled by Dovie's malicious fabrication, prompting a rain-soaked, adrenaline-fueled sprint back home where Anne validates her true identity, restores her peace of mind, and leaves Gilbert low-key ready to throw hands. Chapter 32. With the massive identity crisis finally resolved and peace restored to the household, Dr. Gilbert Blythe and Anne pivot back to local small-town politics and community tea, casually joking about the upcoming Ladies' Aid quilting party at Ingleside and the inevitable demolition of local reputations, while the faithful household general, Susan Baker, intensely stresses over menu logistics, like meticulously mapping out guest lists, table arrangements to avoid old feuds, and stunning decor like the brand new lace tablecloth and a blue and silver flower basket filled with pansies and ferns. When the big day arrives, the local town gossip squad, including hilarious characters like the upbeat Myra Murray in Cherry Red Velvet, sharp-tongued Celia Reese, the morbid Mrs. Donald Reese who constantly quotes her weird kid Mary Anna, and the overly stern elder's wife Mrs. Elder Baxter, converges on the veranda to stitch quilts while dragging everyone's reputations through the dirt. Meanwhile, young Walter Blythe, hiding behind a screen of vines with a slight sore throat, eavesdrops on wild local legends and dark community tea, ranging from botched funerals and ghost-ridden houses to legendary wedding mishaps and alleged historical murder plots. The day culminates in a massive feast of hot chicken pie, mashed potatoes, and creamed peas where everyone eats happily. Susan successfully counts her silver spoons, and the quilters head home with full bellies and freshly finished quilts. Chapter 33. Anne retreats to her moonlit bedroom to decompress after the exhausting ladies' quilting event, only to be struck by a heavy dose of existential dread regarding her children growing up too fast, before her thoughts drift back to a deeply traumatic local memory. The notoriously grim, utterly hated Peter Kirk's funeral back in November 1902. During the service, while the hypocritical town gossips like Camilla Blake and Mrs. Brian Blake trade snarky remarks and lament their lack of handkerchiefs, Peter's embittered former sister-in-law Clara Wilson storms the venue. Clara delivers a brutally unhinged takedown of the deceased tyrant, exposing his years of psychological torture, cruel isolation, and relentless emotional abuse toward his late wife Amy, vowing that she came to laugh rather than mourn. Just as the tension reaches a boiling point, Clara suddenly breaks down in actual tears, and the enigmatic second wife, Olivia Kirk, steps forward to deliver a chillingly quiet, "Thank you, Clara Wilson," revealing a hatred so bottomless and terrifying that it leaves Anne entirely shaken, a dark secret she resolves never to share with young Walter. Chapter 34. Little Rilla Blythe experiences a catastrophic existential meltdown of epic proportions because their loyal housekeeper Susan Baker tasks her with carrying a freshly baked gold and silver cake across the village to the Glen St. Mary Church for an upcoming orphan social. Traumatized by a vague childhood memory of an unkempt local vagrant named Tilly Pake being mocked by neighborhood kids for hauling baked goods down the street, Rilla becomes utterly convinced that transporting a cake publicly is a shameful, humiliating offense that strips away all prospects of ladyhood. Despite praying desperately for an act of divine intervention, such as an earthquake or a torrential rainstorm, her pleas go entirely unanswered, forcing her to don her finest daisy-trimmed hat and march out the door with the dreaded basket. Her walk through town turns into a psychological horror show as local kids like Millie Flagg and Slicky Drew mercilessly heckle her, and her secret crush, Kenneth Ford, casually calls her out, culminating in absolute panic when she spots her idol, the impeccably stylish Sunday school teacher Miss Emmy Parker, heading straight toward her on the road. Rilla panics and hurls the cake straight into the brook to avoid complete and utter humiliation. Later consumed by immense guilt and remorse over destroying Susan Baker's masterpiece, she breaks down in tears and confesses everything to her mother upon her return from town, only to be met with profound comfort, reassurance, and a loving promise that neither her mother nor Susan would ever ask her to do anything disgraceful. Chapter 35. Nan Blythe maintains a rich, highly imaginative inner fantasy life where she projects dramatic secret histories and dark criminal plots onto the ordinary, respectable townsfolk she observes in church and round the glen. Her elaborate daydreaming reaches its absolute peak around a vacant, decaying property known as the Gloomy House on the Lowbridge side road, where she invents a tragic, icily beautiful, and wickedly romantic figure she dubs the Lady with the Mysterious Eyes. Convinced that this mysterious recluse is a haughty, heartbroken princess hiding away to atone for her past sins, Nan becomes utterly obsessed with the legend, guarding her secret fantasy fiercely, while resisting all attempts to send her away on trips that would distance her from her beloved fictional idol. Chapter 36. Nan's romanticized delusions about the Gloomy House shatter instantly when Susan sends her to deliver a parcel containing spare spectacles to the actual resident, an elderly, stout, barefoot widow named Thomasine Fair, who wears a man's old felt hat and chats cheerfully about her favorite almanac, household chores, and her late husband's digestive issues. Though initially heartbroken and profoundly devastated to see her grand, mysterious vision replaced by a wonderfully friendly old woman offering marigolds, ginger cookies, and peppermints, Nan returns home to a gentle, grounding talk with her mother. Anne helps her understand that, while imaginations are wonderful tools for mental escapes, one must always maintain the boundary between reality and fiction, allowing Nan to recover her self-respect and view the world with a renewed, wiser perspective. Chapter 37. Delilah Green is introduced as a stunning new student with round dark blue eyes, sugar brown curls, and a thrillingly dramatic voice who instantly charms Diana Blythe into a passionate, sworn friendship during afternoon recess by claiming to be an unloved, sorrow-laden orphan cursed with a cruel stepmother. Believing every word of the tragic tales, Diana abandons her sensible potential friend, Laura Carr, and becomes fiercely protective of Delilah, defending her against both Susan Baker and Anne, who immediately recognize the classic warning signs of a repeat performance of Jenny Penny's past deceptions. Meanwhile, Delilah spins increasingly wild yarns to an utterly spellbound Diana, claiming her stepmother forces her to live on dry porridge without sugar, chases her with a red-hot tea kettle, and locks her in a haunted garret where she narrowly avoids suicide after encountering a mysterious black creature spinning on a wheel. Susan and Anne secretly and amusedly trade notes over Delilah's over-the-top tribulations, but Diana remains deeply devoted, adopting a sugar-free diet in solidarity and bringing her meat bones from home to combat starvation, completely convinced of her new best friend's profound martyrdom. Chapter 38. Delilah is invited to spend the weekend at Ingleside, while Anne and Gilbert are away in Avonlea, where she plays the role of an enchanted, hyper-efficient, and endlessly grateful guest who praises every corner of the house, polishes silver, and eats second helpings of pie without any prompting. However, the true nightmare unfolds on Monday morning when Diana overhears Delilah at school holding court with the other girls, trashing Ingleside as a shabbily furnished dump run by a half-cracked housekeeper named Susan, mocking the family and claiming the children are abused and neglected. Enraged and utterly betrayed, Diana storms into the classroom, brands Delilah a deceitful Judas, and severs all ties forever, leaving her heartbroken over another massive friendship catastrophe, while Susan and Anne are left fuming over the ungrateful minx who dared insult their home and the household cats. Chapter 39. Anne hits a severe emotional wall during a miserable, drizzly late August day where everything goes completely wrong. From puppies chewing furniture and moths ruining blankets, to her own children driving her crazy and her husband Gilbert completely ignoring her while obsessing over his medical practice. Feeling utterly taken for granted and trapped in a monotonous, unromantic marriage, Anne spirals into an existential panic, torturing herself with memories of gloomy marital quotes and convincing herself that Gilbert no longer loves her and perhaps only ever settled for her as a second choice. Her depressive mood peaks when she receives a dinner invitation from a Charlottetown acquaintance to meet her old Redmond classmate Christine Stewart, formerly her bitterest rival for Gilbert's affections, sparking a fresh wave of absurd, lingering jealousy and dread about the stability of her 15-year marriage. Chapter 40. The dreaded Tuesday arrives with zero miraculous medical emergencies to save Anne from attending the dinner party. And to make matters infinitely worse, Gilbert stumbles into bed at dawn, on their exact 15th wedding anniversary, completely exhausted from delivering twins in the Upper Glen, uttering not a single word of remembrance for the milestone. Left completely high and dry by her exhausted, oblivious husband who can only mutter twins before instantly passing out, Anne faces the bitter reality of her neglected anniversary, left to grapple with her mounting resentment and the looming awkwardness of confronting the dazzling Christine Stewart later that evening. Chapter 41. Concluding this absolute emotional roller coaster of a book with Anne standing completely entranced by her own reflection in the moonlight, rocking her iconic braids and white gown like she's still serving main character energy back in her classic Green Gables and Redmond eras, completely glowing from the inside out after realizing her marriage is actually elite and secure. Having totally processed the absolute clownery of her jealousy over Christine Stewart, who spent the whole dinner party trying to flex with zero riz and talking about random weird stuff like fleas, Anne smiles to herself while listening to a happily snoring Gilbert in the other room. She takes a final wholesome walk around the house to check on her sleeping kids, Jem, Walter, Shirley, Nan, Di, and Rilla, alongside the veteran cat household icon, the shrimp, feeling deeply grateful for her chaotic, beautiful life. The book wraps up with Anne dropping a final iconic mic drop thought, quoting Christine's snooty judgment about her massive family, what a family, choosing to embrace it with pure triumphant energy as she locks in for a future full of endless love, second honeymoon European travel plans, and an unbreakable bond with her husband.